Hello everyone and welcome to my healer guide for new players in Final Fantasy XIV. My name's Drew, and if you're here, you probably want those super sweet healer cues as you level up, or like me, you just happen to enjoy the healer role. Wait! Before we get started, make sure that you like or dislike this video. Don't dislike the video. If you're here, you probably needed the help, and consider supporting the channel for free by hitting the subscribe button below. White Mage and is your strongest raw healer, so if you want to be the most output, White Mage is going to be the one. Make sure you start with Conjurer. Arcanist moves to Scholar and is primarily about shielding and mitigating incoming damage. Astrologian's the only one you can't start with. You'll unlock it later. It's the Flex Healer, and it can fill the opposite role of either of the two through the use of their Sext. Sex. S-E-C-T-S. Whatever, fuck it. We're not going into the intricacies of each of the healers here, but instead we're going to give you a broad spectrum of what to do for the healer role. Now, the golden rule of healing is do as much damage as you can while keeping your team alive. I know that seems super weird to hear, considering we're on a healer guide. But yeah, in Final Fantasy XIV, damage is king. So the golden rule is to keep your team alive. That's it, while dealing as much damage. Now, another basic to healing is going to be keeping your MP high. This is through the use of cooldowns as well as off-global cooldowns to heal effectively. And then the last point I always like to make is overhealing is bad. The fights are scripted, so knowing when damage will come out will help you stay ahead in most fights. All right, let's talk about my first point, keeping your MP up. Now, there's a couple ways to go about doing this. Prioritizing off-global cooldowns to heal effectively versus using other spells are going to be substantially less mana usage. Some don't have mana costs at all, some have very low mana costs, versus those hard cast heals are going to have the highest mana costs during that time. Lucid Dreaming is one of your cooldowns that will help you restore MP. We'll go into that a little bit later in the guide. And then DPSing will allow a decent amount of regen and will also shorten fights. Now, shortening fights means less healing that you have to do, so doing DPS is actually more beneficial, and the cost of these DPS spells versus how much mana you regen normally is offset. So this is pretty good regen while effectively shortening all the fights and making sure you heal even less. Next point I want to talk about is overhealing. Overhealing translates directly to wasted mana, which is something that you will have to manage as your resource. Your job as the healer is to keep everyone alive. That does not mean that they need to be at 100% at all times. For most fights, you know exactly when damage is going to come out that is avoidable and is unavoidable. Knowing these fights will benefit you long term so that you can prioritize when to do damage and knowing when healing is going to be necessary. Last point I want to make is that DPS is kind of your top priority. One of the biggest things about 14 is the DPS requirements mobs in game happen to have. To be the most effective healer possible, a large portion of your time is actually going to be spent DPSing mobs. Now, each healer is going to have a single target spell, a damage over time spell, and an AoE ability. Special shout out to all those white mages out there because I know you love your lives. Holy is the single best AoE spell any of these healers have, and it effectively translates to like 7 seconds of mob stun, where tanks are taking fucking no damage on most mobs. It's insane, and congratulations on having the best ability possible. I hate you as an Astro main. I'm not serious, but damn it. Anyways, always keeping your dot up on higher health mobs is also a very good idea of maximizing your DPS. One point I like to point out to newer players: use your entire toolkit. If you've watched my new player guide to tanking, this is actually a point I bring up as well, and the healer is no exception. Let's talk about some of the abilities in the action roles. Surecast is great. If a fight has knockback or pull-in, Surecast is going to allow you to continue to cast while unaffected. This is underutilized, and as you learn more fights, you can sync this up with specific moments. This is twofold. One, if you know, hey, an AoE burst is coming followed by a knockback, you can continue to cast your AoE heal spell. Or if you know, hey, we're going to get a knockback, but it doesn't deal a lot of damage, you can keep casting DPS and shortening that fight, which is one of your priorities. As I mentioned earlier, we've got Lucid Dreaming, but a basic rule of thumb that I use as a healer, and each healer will tell you differently, so don't take this verbatim. When starting on a boss fight, I typically use this at 70%, and then on cooldown after that, assuming I'm below 70%. It's a 60-second cooldown. It's a great cooldown, and this is shared by all 3 of the healers. It's something that you should utilize frequently. If you're in between pulls and your tank's pulling very quickly and you're at 25-30% mana, you can pop this. Not only will your out of combat regen pump you up, but you also got this working in the background, which effectively makes it 1.5 times faster regen and mana between pulls. Great cooldown. All right, let's talk about Asuna. Asuna is something I notice players don't use enough. Now, if you look at your party frames and you look at another party member or even yourself, if a debuff on a party member has a small blue horizontal line above it, that means that Asuna can be used to remove this. Now, it only has a 1-second cast time, and removing the debuff means removing damage you won't have to heal later. I personally believe that Asuna usage should be priority, as it will allow you to get back to doing what you're supposed to be doing, dealing damage. Alright, Rescue is an ability I want to talk about. This one's super tough because some players feel this ability is actually controversial. If you have come from World of Warcraft, then you have seen this in the form of Life Grip, but effectively you can pull, while you're in combat, a party member to you, and if used correctly, can save them. If you know definitively that using this will save a party member's life, use it. I'm just going to tell you. Yeah, someone might get mad or upset that you hurt their rotation, especially black mages in their ley lines. To which I typically respond, a dead DPS does no DPS. And if they get mad at that, you can link this video to them and tell them that I told you to do it. There. Now you're absolved of all blame. Alright, Swift Blast. I saved this one for last on purpose, as I have two mindsets when it comes to this ability. First, I personally actually only ever use it when I need to res. Instant cast res is amazing versus casting for 10 seconds if you're playing a white mage or a scholar. I happen to main Astrologian, so I have light speed, which effectively brings a res cast down to 4.5 seconds, which is a little bit more doable. Instant cast res is amazing versus casting for 10 seconds. So typically, this spell doesn't get used enough from me. And hey, I'm not perfect. However, my second thought process on this is it can be used with a variety of spells. If you are a white mage, damn you, instant cast Holy from your white mage to get a group stunned at the start when your tank is initially pulling in is awesome and great. And since it is on such a low cooldown at 60 seconds, this is a great usage of it. You can also instant cast AoE heals so that you can continue doing DPS. You get the idea. You're a DPS with heal spells, not a healer with DPS spells. Sorry. But realistically, I don't use this enough because I'm terrified that one of my group members is going to die, and that's a problematic trait of mine, but hey, I'm not perfect, like I said. Alright, let's talk about Limit Break. This is a guide for new players. So, Limit Break is a shared cooldown that acts specific to the job that uses it. I'm only going to talk about healers. For level 1, the healer Limit Break is a 25% HP and MP gain to anybody in range. At level 2, same thing, except instead of 25, you're looking at 60%. Level 3, healer Limit Break will heal everyone to 100% and res any KO'd member without any of the penalty. If you've ever seen when you res a member in combat, they're going to get weakness. If you res them a second time in combat, they're going to get Brink of Death. It's bad. It also gets removed with the level 3 Limit Break, so if someone already has weakness or Brink of Death, that'll get removed from them so they can get back to playing as normal. Since this guide is for beginners, I don't know how to say this, but don't use this. Just don't do it. Realistically, DPS is king in this game. It will be until something gets changed, which I don't think is going to get changed, which I don't think needs to get changed. So that being said, Limit Break should always go to the DPS. There are rare occasions in which healer Limit Break level 3 can be used, but since this is a guide for beginners and not a Savage Raid guide, you're not going to have to care. Alright, let's talk about some bonus tips. I said that I only ever use Swift Cast when I have to res, but you should do the same thing. Resing for hard cast 10 seconds on any fight is almost unrealistic to expect. Even as an Astro main, 4.5 seconds using light speed is also still too ridiculous. If a DPS died on a mechanic that was avoidable, it is that DPS's fault, and therefore they can lay on the ground for a little bit and contemplate their mistakes. Don't worry about macros. One thing that I've noticed from newer players is if they're coming from another MMO, healing macros are a big deal. I'll say this, with how long the global cooldown happens to be and what spells you're actually going to be using later in game, macros early on are more than likely not going to hurt, or not going to hurt, but they're not going to overly help. You're not really learning your class, and that's what I recommend doing first. Learn the intricacies of each of the 3 healers if you're playing all 3 or whichever one you specifically care about, and then you can worry about macros when you get into endgame content. You're really not going to need it for the earlier stuff. My last bonus tip as a healer is your queues are going to be super short, which means more than likely you're going to be taking advantage of almost every roulette that there is available to you. The lower level dungeons are actually, in my opinion, as a healer, more difficult than some of the higher level stuff. And here's why. Is because you're dealing with sprouts, or you're dealing with characters who are also going through their leveling roulette and think they know better. You have less abilities, so that being said, you're kind of stuck not damaging as much as you should and focusing on hard casting because you don't have some of those off global abilities or some of those other abilities that allow you to continue to progress quickly at higher levels. Speaking from an Asuna main, having aspected benefic spells in regen form so that I can just constantly have a regen up and continue to deal damage is something I don't get to experience when I do the leveling roulette, which is why I try to avoid it at all costs. Same goes for every other class. If you're maining white mage, the feeling of getting holy and realizing how amazing it is, and then going to Sastasha is tough. That really hurts. Like, honestly, it breaks people's souls. If I liked white mage more, I'd feel more upset, but I don't. Not that it's bad, I just personally don't enjoy it. So, that's the basics, and if you've made it this far, fuck yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Good luck in healing in the future. And as I said, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like button below. If you want to see more of this content or some of my other content, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. That is a free way to help support the channel, and we will catch you in the future. This is Drew from Team Future Strategy. See you next time. Peace!